Hey YouTube, it's your host Chef Paul Cat, and welcome to Chef Paul's Kitchen. Today we're going to be doing a simple Italian garlic loaf recipe. So follow me over into the kitchen. I've got the mise en place laid out for us. What you will need is one and a half teaspoons of active dry yeast, a teaspoon of sugar, 2 teaspoons of olive oil, 2 to 3 cups of bread flour, but all-purpose flour will work as a substitution. A teaspoon of your Italian sweet herbs, salt, about a tablespoon, and 1.5 cloves of real garlic. And I will teach you today how to sweat off garlic, because we'll have to sweat the garlic to put it into the bread. And you'll also need one cup of warm water. You don't want to use hot water. Anywhere between 100 and 120 is great. Yeast grows better at this temperature. Anything hotter than that and you'll kill the yeast. Anything lower than that and you'll kill the yeast, and you won't get the rise you want in your bread, and you'll have flat bread. That being said, you want to take a small pan, just a small little skillet like this, and some oil. I use olive oil since I'm going into an Italian recipe. You want to add just a little bit of oil to the bottom of it, maybe about a teaspoon and a half of olive oil. And you want to go on low heat to sweat garlic. We'll let that pan heat up for a second while I process the garlic down. You want to take the edge of your knife and the palm of your hand. Press down against the edge of that knife. That breaks the skin loose and also starts to remove the aromatic oils that are in the garlic naturally. You put the shells to the side, because you don't want to cook it with the shells on it. They'll give you tough product, and it's just not it does not overall taste good in your product. And you just want to peel that skin off, get it good and down to the raw cloves, kind of like that. Just peel it down. The garlic will tell you where to peel at. And you just want to peel that tough hide off the top of it. By this time, you should be able to smell that raw garlic smell, which in my family, that's a comforting aroma. We love garlic in my family. Maybe not in most families, but my family. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a quick mince on this garlic. You can use a food processor, Food Ninja, whatever you happen to have handy that'll mince. But I just like the authenticity of mincing my own garlic. Kind of gets you immersed in the garlic and gets you that hands-on pride that you did it by hand. Using machinery, yeah, it has its purposes, but when you're making a bread of this caliber, as gentle and delicate as that loaf's going to be, you just really want to get your hands in there and get involved with it with your hands. It's love. It's putting love into that dish. Respect the ingredients that you're using. Love those ingredients. And then just get a good, you don't want to get a super fine mince on it, but you don't want large blasted chunks of garlic floating around your bread. Let's go back over here to our skillet. It's not quite where it needs to be, so we'll give it just a little more heat, because that oil should move really gently and fluidly when it's ready for that oil. Now, as I said, you're going to have a cup of warm water. So you want to let that water get warm, but not hot. You don't want hot water because it'll kill the yeast, as I said earlier. There we go. We're starting to get that warm water we need. You can also heat it up on the stove if that's easier for you, if you have a slower water tank. You can heat it up, just be mindful that you want to keep it between 100 and 150 degrees Fahrenheit, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. You want to add that to your mixing bowl. You want to add your dry yeast. We're going to try to get this yeast started to activate. Sugar feeds the yeast. The warm water gives it a good base to live in. And then you just want to give it a quick roll around in that water. You should see a froth once you get it all mixed in and dissolved in. You should see a froth form on top of it. That foam is good. You want that foam. So while we're letting this yeast proof, which was what I was telling you, it should look like a foamy cream. You want to let that yeast sit there and proof. Let's check our pan. All right, our oil is ready. So we're going to take the cutting board and all, scrape it using the back of the knife. Never use the blade of your knife to do this. Never. The blade of the knife should only be for cutting. Never use it as a scraper. Never use it for any other purpose than that. Or you'll dull your knives and you'll be sitting there every day sharpening your knives, and it's just not a good time. When you could be spending more time getting down to the nuts and bolts of making dishes you like to do. Give it an occasional stir over here just to keep things dissolved and working. As you can see over here with our yeast, it looks like a creamy liquid. That is what we're looking for. That is what we want. We want it to look like that. And as you see the light action over here on your garlic, you just want to keep stirring it around. You don't want your garlic to take any color. No coloration. You don't want it to take on any coloration. Your only goal here is to soften and tender the garlic and partially cook it for the baking process. And it'll lend a good component of flavor to your bread. Using the real thing, you can use powdered garlic, but why would you do that to an Italian loaf? I mean, you want to be authentic with it. So we're going to use real clove garlic. And we're going to just sweat it down here real lightly. Meaning you don't want it too aggressive, but you don't want it too quiet either. You want to get that happy medium where you should smell the sweet aromatic coming out of that garlic. As you're moving it around in the pan like this, you should start to smell that sweet garlic aroma coming out. And no longer that heavy garlic smell. You should start smelling a sweet aroma. One chef told me, you should smell the sweet aroma of the garlic and not the sharp smell of the raw garlic. We'll let that sit there for just a second and sweat off. In the meantime, let's go back over here and look in on our yeast. As you notice, we're starting to get a culture forming in here, and it's about ready to add flour too. But before we do that, we want to go ahead and add our aromatics to it. You should start to smell that sweet aromatic aroma of the garlic, and it's ready to go into the bread dough. Now, there's two ways to cool this off. One, definitely remove it from the heat. You do not want to keep cooking this. But you don't want to put it in here hot, like I said, because it will... Because if you put it in there hot, you'll kill the yeast, and then the bread won't rise, and you'll have flat bread. You can refrigerate it, or B, you can flash cool it by freezing it, putting it in the freezer for just a minute or two. You don't want it super cold, but you don't want it steaming ass hot. You want to get it to that happy medium where our garlic will be happy, where our yeast will be happy, and the garlic will work well together. So we'll put it over here in the freezer for a second. And like I said, the only purpose is to take the heat of that garlic down to temperature so that it plays well with the yeast. We want to get that par cook on the garlic. Now, what you can do at this point, add your sweet Italian herbs. Make those your own. I did not list the herbs specifically because I don't want you to just copycat this recipe. This recipe is generations old, and the recipe I have was given to me by a really good friend of mine. We'll add the salt in here and the olive oil. You might say, well, why did we cook it in olive oil? And we're adding olive oil to this because it needs a fat base to come together and to give it lubrication in the baking process. So we'll mix all this together in here and get everything happily incorporated. We don't want anything being left out of the mix. We should now be able to go over here, grab our garlic out of the freezer, and add it into our mix, because we are making a garlic Italian loaf. So what's an Italian garlic loaf without garlic? You want to make sure everything gets incorporated in here at this point. Everything's mixed in there. You want to now take your 1 cup measuring cup right here. You want to add the flour in 1 cup at a time. This allows you to get thorough coverage of the flour. You want one cup. Then you'll want to stir that in. Stir it very gently. And basically what you're doing here is you're trying to incorporate all those wet ingredients into that flour. By now you should smell it. It smells kind of like a beer in your bread bowl here. It should have that light brewed smell to it. It smells like brewed beer, because you've got the yeast working with the flour and the sugar in there. You want to keep a hand towel handy because you're going to wash your hands a lot during the process of cooking. Because clean hands mean a happy product. I went with 2 cups of flour, but just for the show of it, I'm going to use the cup. See? 2 cups of bread flour. Well, this is AP flour because we didn't get bread flour in time for the episode. But you can use all-purpose flour, or AP flour as they call it in the industry. And you should be able to see it forming into a lump of dough in here. And you want to make sure that you get all that flour incorporated into the bread dough. This will ensure that the bread binds and holds together. As you can see, it's starting to look like a dough ball. So at this point, you want to get some flour on your hands. Move this stuff out of the way. And lightly flour the surface that you're going to be working on, because dough likes to stick, and if you've got flour, if you don't have the flour, it's kind of like preventing you from you see how that dough is starting to form. You want to add just a little bit to bind it together. Just on the top, just lightly. You don't want to put too much extra in there because you don't want it to turn brick hard before you get the chance to knead the dough. That forms the pockets that makes the bread have those airy little pockets in it. And all of us remember Grandma or Mom making bread in the kitchen, or I hope you do if you didn't. Going to the local bakery or something and getting a sight of and the fresh bread that you could buy from the bakeries. You really want freshness. Wash your hands. And it's not a big deal if you get too much moisture in there. You can add extra flour until the moisture is absorbed by the flour. See, the nice thing about bread is it gives. It's giving out. After you get that yeast culture fixed, bread is pretty much a forgiving taskmaster. You just want to take just a little bit of the AP flour and a little bit at a time. Just sprinkle it over the dough. And then get your hands in there with just a little bit on your fingertips and just work it around. You want to work until that dough starts to bind a little bit. You don't just want to go directly into the kneading process. Bread is one thing that is very labor intensive, but it's very rewarding at the end of it, because then you know, okay, well, I made that with my hands. I put my hands to doing something, and it turned out beautiful. And plus, your house smells great as a side product of it. So we're gonna grab our dough ball out now, and we're just gonna gently knead it out, little by little. Roll it in, flip it over, smash it out, roll it up, smash it out, roll it back over on itself, smash it out. And what we're doing here is we're building the proteins in the bread that are going to hold it together, the fibers that are going to hold that bread together and give you those light, airy pockets. Otherwise, you get communion wafers, and that's not fun. It's too reminiscent of going to church, and today's Monday. So we will go ahead and knead out our bread dough, add a little bit more flour to the dough, to the board. You want to just give it a few kneads, a few pushes. Basically what we're doing is nudging that dough into being a coherent, smooth ball. We want it all mixed in there, good and solid. Sprinkle a little bit more on there just to allow it to move a little bit easier. All right, and your dough ball should look something similar to this. That's how your dough ball should look before we move to the next phase of this. And that is, over here I have a bowl that's already been oiled. You want to kind of give it a quick roll and whirl in the oil to coat with just a thin coat of oil so that it stays so that it'll climb the sides of this bowl, because you want to give about an hour for this dough to rise. It'll be about, give or take, an hour or so in time. So let's come back when we've completed the rising process, and we'll let you see what the dough ball should look like after it rises. You should always let it grow to twice its normal size. It means the yeast is doing what it's supposed to do and allowing it to rise. In the meantime, what I would do is, depending on how slow your oven is, I would start preheating my oven to 350. Because the next step of this is we're going to punch the dough down. I know it doesn't make sense that, oh, well, you just said we're going to let the dough rise. Why are we punching it down? It's not just to give us a uniform size, but it's all of the dough of the bread loaf, but it also allows us to compress some of those air pockets that I was telling you about. It compresses those down so that they work a little bit easier. And we're going to let this sit for about, like I said, about an hour. We'll come back to it and we'll push the dough down, get it ready, and then we'll shape it on the sheet tray, and we should be ready to bake it. So I'll meet you back here in about an hour or so. Thank you for your attention to this.